Good afternoon, everybody, and you're all very welcome to the afternoon session on the Empowerment and Partnership in Student Engagement Conference. My name is Frances O'Connell, the Vice President of Academic Affairs and Registrar in AIT. I'm delighted to be with you this afternoon and to work with my co-chair, Dylan Scanlon. This afternoon, we'll get the opportunity to hear about developments at the Irish national level on enabling, empowering, partnering with staff and student, co-working to maximise student engagement opportunities. We will learn from colleagues working across Europe on student participation in higher education governance and enhancement. This will allow us to reflect on our own work and approaches here. Before I hand over to Dylan, I would just like to note that in AIT we have a proud tradition in demonstrating our engagement with one of the key student feedback mechanisms, the student survey. Year on year, we've had the highest response rates from our students to the survey across all participating HEIs in Ireland. So I'd now like to hand over to you, Dylan, who is our NStEP student trainer and a PhD student in the University of Limerick. Over to you, Dylan.
Great, thanks. No, great, thanks, Frances. I'm happy to introduce our first speaker, Oisín Hassan. Oisín is the Programme Manager of NStEP, the National Student Engagement Programme. The programme is a partnership of the Higher Education Authority, Quality or QQI, and the Union Students of Ireland, which was founded in 2016. NStEP works to enhance and embed practices and approaches to meaningful and authentic student engagement in higher education, supporting and fostering cultures of staff-student partnerships. So really excited to hear your presentation, Oisín.
Thank you, Dylan. I will just get my screen sorted now. I think that should be it sorted. Small technical issue there. I think we're back.
Yeah, that's working, Oisín.
Brilliant, thank you. Folks, very nice to see you all here today, even if it is virtually and I can't actually see you in person. But my name is Oisín Hassan. I'm the Programme Manager of NStEP, the National Student Engagement Programme. NStEP is a partnership of the QQI, of the Higher Education Authority, and of USI, the Union of Students in Ireland. And over the last number of years, we've been developing capacity building and training exercises across the country in student engagement. And what I'm going to talk to you today about is a kind of a new approach, a new national approach that we've been developing as we move ahead into the next phase of the programme's work. So, to set the scene, NStEP works off the basis of a conceptual framework that was developed back in 2016 by the Higher Education Authority through their Enhancement Student Engagement and Decision Making report. And it really was a seminal moment for Irish higher education because not only was NStEP launched on the same day as the report and tasked with building capacity across the sector, we were also given a clear message to go to the sector with. And that message, as John O'Halloran mentioned earlier, was that students are partners, they're not consumers, and that very clearly came through at a national level. And what we wanted to do at that stage was to support institutions, staff and students together to develop institutional policies for student engagement. And that was to happen through a series of 10 principles of student engagement. But since then, we've been having a bit of a reflection on what's changed in the sector, what new practices have emerged, and what have we learned as a national sector at local and institutional and at national levels. And what we've been doing is looking again at those principles, looking again at that framework. It was very conceptual. What we wanted to do was move to a more practical basis, building on the theory, but bringing in the reality as well. And you can see, I'll not take you through it too much on the screen, but you can see we've had a bit of a process. We've been building towards this moment. We've been working with you, staff and students in all roles, in all responsibilities and in all walks of life over the last 4+ years. And what we're trying to do is bring together everything that you've experienced and everything that you've told us into a new vision 2020 has been all about creating that new vision, that new framework, and today is actually a bit of a launch for us in starting to move towards a new approach in 2021. That has been published in a discussion paper as of yesterday, where we try to set out a new framework for student engagement and decision making in Ireland, taking that idea of the conceptual and bringing it to you, evolving it, effectively evolving what we mean by student engagement to create a more practical and agreed approach for the sector. And this, for us, really allows staff and students to work from the same basis, to understand the same principles and the same concepts. And that real shared knowledge is a way forward for developing meaningful partnership. So whenever we talk about student engagement and decision making, I want to talk to you a bit about what our understanding of that is. We haven't sought to define really rigid definitions because everybody has a different meaning and a different approach. What we wanted to do was bring together an understanding that everyone could buy into, while also using the phrases of student engagement and concepts in their own context. So first off, what we decided to look at was the idea of student voice versus student engagement, and they're very often used interchangeably. They're used to mean the same things, but we don't think that's necessarily the case, because for us, student voice is where students actively raise opinions and views. Perhaps they're asked, perhaps they're not asked. It's that action of conversation and debate and discussion in an institution that is listened to, where students are heard. But that's not necessarily for us student engagement. For us, student engagement is the process where students and staff actually seek to work together, having listened to that voice and to actually begin to act upon it. But crucial to that is that student engagement leaves room for collaboration, because for us, not all student engagement is actually a partnership process. That doesn't mean that student engagement can't be very valuable if it's not partnership, but it is important to note the difference between the two. And for us, that student partnership is all about looking at power and how that plays a role. And that's why today's conference has been so important in terms of looking at power and empowerment. And that's been a big focus for us. We don't necessarily talk about student partnership as equals, because not everybody will play the same role. But we do want to look at it from this idea of reciprocity and beginning to share higher education and share our approaches to changing it. So what framework have we developed? We have a model that we're calling 4455, and you can see a bit more about it in the discussion paper. I'll take you through it very briefly now, and I won't go into too much detail because I want to give you time to mull it over and to engage with us in the next couple of months. Starting off with the 4-4. So there are 4 drivers. These are for us the cultural values, I suppose, that an institution should try to live and breathe if it wants to really meaningfully engage with its students. And that's the idea that the institution should be self-critical or critique and evaluate itself with openness and honesty, that it's built on principles of democracy, and that crucially the learning community is a community for all to play a role. And those roles shouldn't be rigid, that it is inclusive, that it gives space for everyone to play their part. And this idea that we've talked about so much, the idea of students as partners needs to be a lived cultural value of an institution in order to create real meaningful student engagement. The 4 domains of governance and management, teaching and learning, quality assurance and enhancement, and student representation and organisation. This is where people make things happen. This is where change happens. This is where those values, those drivers, need to be lived and actioned. And while there are lots of other spaces around the institution, we hope that everyone can see that they have a role to play in those 4 domains. You know, you might not be a teacher, but you still have a role to play in influence in teaching. So for us, the domains are where change begins to happen. The seeds are sown. The 5 principles. I mentioned 10 principles earlier, so this is a big change for the Irish sector. So I want you to take the time to go away and look at these 5 principles. But for us, the 5 principles are a narrative that we want everyone to buy into and see themselves in. And it's this idea that dialogue, it's not just about conversation and feedback. Dialogue is an active, meaningful discussion where everyone actually has a role to play. And through that meaningful dialogue that's open and transparent, we build trust between students and staff and vice versa. Through that building of trust and open conversation, we need to be equitable. So if we create student engagement approaches, can everyone access those approaches? Can everyone use the opportunities that are available to them? Because we so often talk about diversity in higher education, but how do we actively include the diversity of those voices? And by being equitable and inclusive, we empower both students and staff to take up an active role in that dialogue and that engagement. And ultimately, it should be about co-creation, where people can co-develop solutions and outcomes and ideas together. That can be the smallest of solutions to the smallest of problems, and that's where the seeds are sown for a much greater partnership. I'll leave you with the 5 enablers. We haven't gone into too much detail about those in the report that we launched yesterday, and that's because we want to talk to you over the course of the next couple of months about how do we realise these 5 enablers, how do we flesh them out, and how do we bring them together in a way that creates a framework that supports you in your work, in your role, wherever it is you are in higher education today. So our next steps are, we had a student engagement chat back in June, and we want to have more chats over the next couple of months. So we'll be coming to talk to you, staff and students across all walks of institutional life, to find out your views on the future of our framework, our national approach in Ireland. And on that, I will say thank you. I'm being told that I am to introduce Gohar. So that was my mistake. I'm afraid the co-chairs are probably screaming into the mics there. I'm really proud to introduce my friend, actually, someone who I've worked with for quite a long time, the president of the European Students' Union, Gohar, Hovhannisyan, who was actually just elected not very long ago to the role, but she has a wealth of experience in her own background as a student representative in Armenia and now at the heart of Europe in Brussels. So I'll hand over to Gohar.
Thank you so much, Oisín. I hope you all hear me well. Yes, I get thumbs up. Perfect. I'm just, so happy to be joining you. And I think the first thing I want to say, just thank you for having me here in this conference, because just the Irish context and the frameworks that you use and you work with are so much close to my heart, because these are one of the first things I started studying myself when I was still a student representative back in Armenia. So just awesome to be here. Maybe, of course, I would be more excited to visit you in person in Dublin, but I will try to spend some part of my evening today, maybe just looking, doing virtual tours over Dublin, reading about the Trinity College Library, and then gasping at your beautiful landscapes. But for now, my mission is indeed to talk with you about student partnership in higher education. When I was preparing for this talk, I was thinking, what story should I be telling you to kind of bring a perspective on student partnership? Should I start from the medieval times of the Bologna University, where students used to be rectors, they would hire or reject their teachers? Or should I talk about the struggle of the Czech students during the World War II that we celebrated a week ago, the 17th of November? These are, of course, great and very inspiring stories, because students as young veins of the societies come and bring changes, not only for themselves, but for all generations that come to follow them. And we often acknowledge that universities are having a massive impact on students, but I believe that students are having a huge impact on their universities too. And this is something that we need to put in a perspective when we discuss student partnership in higher education. I think to achieve student partnership, we should start looking at the basic conditions that are enabling environment for student representation. And I think part of the framework that you were referring to, Oisín, very well describes this enablers that I want to mention now. So several type of enablers that I can mention are, for example, the institution's adherence to fundamental democratic principles, to democracy. Another enabler is clear and extensive formal provisions defining the terms of student participation for all levels and domains of institutional governance. Another enabler is full and continuous recognition of student representation as free and independent with respect to aims and decisions and activities of the student body. Then another enabler is the long-term institutional support and resources for a sustainable student representation, and of course continuous training for student representatives. And obviously political will that should come from decision makers to have actual and not just only formal continuous student involvement. I also want to focus on an aspect of conception of students by higher education institutions, because this is important when we want to understand student partnership. Universities often have a conception of students in the following different roles. They see students as members of the academic community. They might see students as a constituency or stakeholders group. They can see students as citizens and the future elite. And they often see students as consumers, clients, or users. These different conceptions of students have direct repercussions to the student and higher education governance relations. And this affects formal and informal provisions for student participation, as well as the other basic conditions for an enabling environment for student partnership. Therefore, we need changes in the environment to change the conception of students to achieve a better partnership within higher education. And then going to what do we understand by partnership? Partnership implies shared responsibilities in each step of the institutional decision-making process, and this starts from very basic things like agenda setting, drafting, decision-making, implementation and monitoring of institutional decisions, and grows more and more. It is the highest form of participation for students, so it's not just participation, but it goes beyond to achieve partnership. And at this level, representative student bodies and the university administration cooperate closely and broadly while respecting the independence of student representation. And student representatives participate in decision-making bodies typically with full voting rights. At least this is what we observe to happen when we talk about student partnership on in different European contexts. And going beyond to embedding student partnership starts from sometimes, I would say, intentionally forgetting any hierarchical association with the word student. If those who want to partner with students believe that their responsibility is to simply act in the best interest of students, disregarding what those students actually believe their interests are, then students will really have difficulties to partner. Students partnership and their capabilities to influence the learning process should not be limited by the expectations as to their role or the behavior inherent in given cultural frames. And I know that in the United Kingdom and in Ireland, you have, I would say, one of the most developed policies and institutional practices in student-centered learning, which is explicitly linked, obviously, to student engagement and is core to student partnership. And as I said, I know this not just from hearing, but I have been learning about these frameworks when I was still a student representative in Armenia. And back then, when I read all of this and met very awesome Irish colleagues, I just gasped that it is possible to do extensive amount of work to create such a partnership. In my university, the type of partnership that I have experienced was very limited, often to tokenistic meeting rooms or some very tough arguments for the student rights, in classrooms or in corridors. And only at the European level, I would say, I started really experiencing how and what student partnership can look like. And I very much hope that you will continue embedding this further in Ireland, and this will be transposed to other European countries as well, because many other countries are just at the earlier stage of looking into student-centered approaches to education. I also firmly believe that this type of partnership is a reflection of the liberal values of modern societies, according to which agentic individuals are central to social and economic progress. Political democracy, open market economies, cultural freedom are all built around capabilities of empowered individuals. And I surely believe that higher education is expected to prepare students to become agentic individuals, both through learning the theory at the university, but as well as practicing the theory through student partnership that they can build in higher education institution. And finally, I want to say that I feel very honored to speak at this session together with Sjur Bergan, who will speak right after me, a very honorable friend for me today. His friendship to me, and not only to me, but also to a lot of other student representatives, is a successful story of student partnership. I remember the very first time I met him at a coffee break of a meeting in Council of Europe building back in Strasbourg. It was one of the very first events that I was attending as a freshly elected executive committee member of the European Students' Union. Sjur Bergan, the head of the Department of Education at the Council of Europe, approached me during this coffee break, mentioned his name, and said that it's nice to meet me. And of course, I knew his name, I knew his title, I have heard about him, I have read different things about him, and I was just amazed that he could just approach me and introduce and say hi. But today I know that Sjur came to me to greet me because partnership doesn't start with the titles and with the hierarchy, but partnership starts when persons who are willing to know each other are also willing to just partner with each other beyond the titles. That is my successful story of student partnership. And if we believe that a successful story is made out of is making a successful society where people can pursue the goals important to their own lives through individual or collective action, then I think higher education, which enables and strengthens students' partnership, is a firm condition to build a successful story and obviously a successful society. Thank you so much for listening to me. I hope that the successful society you are building in Ireland really gets to be better and better through the partnership you build in higher education institutions, and I look forward to our discussion.
Thank you so much, Gohar, and I suppose we can all give you a virtual round of applause there. And very interesting, and I'm looking forward to asking some questions. But before that, and before our next speaker, we're going to go on to a pre-recorded student perspective on the principle of building trust through student engagement now.
As a student, I feel trust in academia is crucial, and it goes both ways. And if trust, I think it's crucial that trust is established very early on, as once it's gone, it's very difficult to get back. And I think it's easy to establish at the early stages just through good communication and transparency. And of course, that goes both ways. From my experience, these are often missing from both sides of the relationship, and from the student perspective, I find when these are gone, attendance drops, motivation drops. This leads to bad grades, and that causes a snowball effect. And I can imagine from a staff point of view, it must be hard to do your job to the best of your ability when you can't trust the people you're supposed to be teaching. So ultimately, if trust is lost, nobody wins.
Thank you very much. That is
Thank you very much.
Very insightful piece actually from the student there about the importance of relationships, and linking back to the Gohar's presentation as well. I now would like to hand over to our next presentation. This is a pre-recorded perspective on the principles of building trust through student engagement by Bergan, that was mentioned by the previous speakers. Your presentation will consider the relationship between student presentation and student engagement. I think there's quite a lot of echo. I'm seeing on the chat. Hopefully that's sorted. Just to proceed, student engagement goes well beyond elections to include deliberation and participation. Engagement is about developing commitment to public space, whether that's on campus or in society at large. The presentation we're about to hear will further consider how policymakers can encourage student engagement by making existing engagement, as well as by making it possible for higher education to fulfil its four major purposes. So just to introduce Sjur, he's head of the Education Department of the Council of Europe and leads the current Council of Europe projects on competences for democratic culture and the European qualification passport for refugees. He has also represented the Council of Europe in the Bologna follow-up group and board since 2000 and chaired 3 successive working groups on structural reforms in 2007 to 2015. Sjur was a member of the editorial group for the Council's White Paper on Intercultural Dialogue and a main author of the Lisbon Recognition Convention, as well as on recommendations related to the themes of public responsibility for higher education, academic freedom and institutional autonomy, and ensuring quality education. Sjur is series editor of the Council of Europe Higher Education series and an author of the Qualification Introduction to a Concept and Not by Bread Alone entitlement, as well as a number of numerous book chapters and articles on education and higher education policy. Sjur was also one of the editors of the RAB Handbook on Leadership and Governance in Higher Education 2009 to 2015 and one of the session coordinators at the Bologna Process Researchers Conference in 2015, 2018 and 2020. He's the recipient of the 2019 European Association for International Education Awards for Vision and Leadership. So I'm sure we'll all enjoy now his recording. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, thank you very much for the invitation to speak at this conference on empowerment and partnership and student engagement. Like everyone else, I would much have preferred to be in Dublin, even in November. So I'm thankful the technology makes it possible to meet online. I am honored to be speaking immediately after my friend Gohar Hovhannisyan, the current president of the European Students' Union, and 1 week after the International Students' Day. November 17 commemorates occasions on which students and the student movement have reminded broader society of the importance of democracy and citizen engagement. That takes me to my first point. Is there a difference between student representation and student engagement? In Europe, we're doing fairly well on student representation. Even if Gohar and other student leaders would rightly argue we could do better. And even if what is true for Europe in general is not true for every European country. Belarus is an obvious example. Student representation, then, is about ensuring the student voice is heard when decisions are made. The 2018 Bologna Implementation Report states simply that almost all higher education systems require student and staff representation. When we surveyed the situation quite some years ago, students generally had 15 to 25% of representatives in university governing bodies in Europe, and I do not think the situation has changed radically. The institution and faculty levels seem to be where student representation is most solidly anchored. It seems somewhat less solid in departments and also at the level of higher education systems. At European level, students are well represented by ESU in the Bologna follow-up group and in several working groups. ESU co-chaired the group that developed principles and guidelines for the social dimension of higher education adopted by Bologna ministers just a few days ago. Student representation builds on student elections, and that is perhaps our entry into student engagement. Elections require that students engage at least enough to cast a vote. Turnout in election varies between countries, but it also varies between sectors, and turnout in student election is too often too low. So the first challenge in student engagement is getting out the vote. To do so, students must feel that who represents them in university governance matters because the decisions they make matter. Student organizations have work to do, but so do policymakers. Student engagement goes well beyond governance, as democracy goes beyond elections to include deliberation and participation. Engagement is about developing commitment to public space, whether that space is on campus or in society at large. It is about recognizing that studies are about more than ECTS credits and exams to pass. It is about making education more than just training. 2 years ago, the Council of Europe organized a conference on the local mission of higher education with Dublin City University. In 2014, we organized with other partners from both Europe and the US a conference on the democratic mission of higher education at Queen's University Belfast. Neither mission can be fulfilled without student engagement. The partnership with the US is important because while US universities are not very strong on student representation, student engagement is real and to some extent institutionalized. From our partners in Dublin as well as in Belfast, we have seen good examples of student engagement with broader society, from science shop to community centers, motivating school students to aim for higher education, even if they come from an area of town where they walk past campus every day, but never dream of stepping onto it. To young people exploring their options, students are better role models than professors. The student engagement we saw in Dublin and Belfast is a commitment to helping make our societies better. It can take many forms. Teaching slightly younger students and being role models to them is one. Offering practical help is another. Law students at my alma mater, the University of Oslo, have for decades been offering free legal advice to people who can ill afford to pay for it and may not even think of this as student engagement. Working on campus to help integrate new students or students who arrive from abroad is a third. These are students who may not easily find their footing in a new environment and for whom contacts with other students who already know their way around the university can make the difference between success and failure. Student engagement can be helping underrepresented groups organize, but not doing it for them. Or it cannot be teaching language to refugees and migrants. It can be revealing the delights of museums to people who would otherwise do as people from one of its neighborhoods did with Queens, walk past, but not in. As we see, there are many examples of good practice and probably even more possibilities. But how do we, as policymakers, help turn possibilities into realities? On a very immediate level, we can encourage the use of the instruments we already have. In the European higher education area, structural reforms are among the more important achievements. Structures that are to be used. The credit system and national qualifications frameworks, for which Ireland has been a pioneer, allow for greater flexibility, devising study programs and individual learning paths. Nothing should prevent any institution from granting a reasonable number of ECTS credits for student engagement that fits into a learning path. And this does not apply only to students of social sciences. It applies equally well to students of astrophysics who motivate young people at the community center to reach for the stars. In assessing quality, we could look at the way institutions encourage student engagement as one of the elements. For the possibilities to be used, higher education leaders and public authorities, as well as such institutions, must demonstrate that student engagement matters. There must be rewards so that students who engage and institutions that encourage them to do so make it clear that this is a part of what higher education is about, not just an optional extra. Policy, practice, and the rhetoric need to evolve. Policymakers must make it possible for higher education to fulfill its 4 major purposes in equal measure. These are preparation for the labour market, preparation for active citizenship and democratic societies, personal development, and the development of a broad, advanced knowledge base. As an organization for democracy and human rights, the Council of Europe is of course particularly concerned with the role of education in developing democratic engagement. We have developed a reference framework for competences for democratic culture, with 20 competences organized around 4 clusters: values, attitudes, skills, and knowledge and critical understanding. They apply to all levels of education, including higher education. They can be developed in schools and on campus, but also in student engagement off campus. But they cannot be developed without engagement, without commitment, as something you learn about in theory for 2 hours a week and forget about the rest of the time. Engagement and democratic competences are like languages. You cannot learn them from books alone. And if you do not use them, you lose them. Student engagement is part of what higher education should aim for and what universities should educate for. Countries like Ireland provide good examples. We need to create opportunities for student engagement through policy, demonstrates its importance through action, and encourage it through the way we refer to students. Students are members of the academic community. They are not clients or customers. Clients shop around. If they do not find what they want, they move on. Members of a community try to improve that community and emigrate only if all else fails. The difference between students and as clients and students as students, between passive students and engaged students, is crucial not only to the future of higher education, it is crucial to Europe. Thank you very much.
Thank you sincerely, Sjur. We're now going to see a short video again in relation to the student voice, addressing the topic of empowerment and partnership.
Empowerment to me in our higher education and in our institutions is directly linked with engagement and awareness of how institutions run. So for students, empowerment can be knowing that things like there are committees in the college that you can sit on, like academic council or student experience, being a class rep and getting engaged at class rep council and helping make decisions and putting forth campaigns and helping the Students' Union run campaigns, and also learning what the Students' Union is and how every student is a member in the union and your voice matters. I also think students forget that they directly affect the decisions that happen in the college when things aren't working. Students can come together and use their collective voices and empower each other and to make a change for the better. and they can also affect their wider community as well, with similar campaigns. And empowerment is also talking with like lecturers and things, and librarians and other people and staff within your institution, creating a dialogue between these different staff members and different students can really empower both sides to improve institutions and improve education as a whole.
Thank you. We've now hit the part of our proceedings this afternoon for a questions and answers session. And perhaps if I might just launch this by asking Gohar or Sjur in relation to what they think are the obstacles to building a culture of partnership within higher education institutions. I ask this from my own position as a Vice President and Registrar as regards what are those obstacles or barriers culturally that may influence this partnership. If I'd like to ask Sjur perhaps first.
Okay, thank you very much, and thank you also for accepting the recording. As you can see, I'm not quite in the digital native generation like Gohar, so we thought it was the safer option. I think actually the atmosphere, the context in which you have student representation depends a lot on the context of society at large. If you have a society that accepts that you can challenge authority, if you have a society that accepts engagement, then it's also easier to build a culture of partnership. So I think partly it depends obviously on the attitudes of decision makers in the institution. They have to not only themselves believe, but very clearly signal that student input to the life of the institution is valuable. But the other aspect perhaps is also that students themselves have to want to engage. So they have to be recognized for this somehow. It has to be clear to students that this is not time wasted. And I think education is very important in building commitment to public space. And I think, you know, one of the things we're seeing in society now is more of a concentration on our individual private space and less on public space. But I'll leave it at that because I'm sure Gohar would have a lot to say about this also.
Thank you, Sjur. Can I hand over to Gohar just in relation to your perspective on this?
Sure. Yeah, I will. I'll probably start from this last part that Sjur mentioned about the need for students to recognize that their input is needed to develop partnership within education and to develop education overall, because we have been debating among ourselves, among student representatives on this as well. And here we see that especially for those students who come from a type of a schooling system which is very parental, kind of, where in the school they don't really have liberty to take ownership of their learning, it becomes really challenging to engage in student partnership and in building partnership in higher education at the university level, because it's kind of a very new way of functioning for them, and they might often even resist. They might just resist on taking new responsibilities, on taking ownership for their learning, on taking self-directed approach to their learning. So all this resistance kind of has certain reasons why they are built in, and then the role of the institutions here comes to create this very open communication with students and truly give them kind of the trust that their voice is needed and is heard and will be useful. And I think a big obstacle for this particular situation becomes the resistance among academia, among the teachers, because these are the kind of the primary contacts for students, right? To actually kind of perceive what is their role in the classroom. And if in the classroom they feel that their teachers are resisting to give them any ownership for learning, then it becomes really hard to engage with the partnership. So I think we need to work a lot with our teachers to make sure that they trust students to give some ownership, and this will enable creating deeper partnership.
Thank you very much, Gohar. Can I hand over to Dylan, my co-chair?
Great, thank you both for really interesting presentations and a lot we can learn in the Irish context here. And I suppose my question, and one of the questions from the audience as well, is going to focus on what we can learn in the Irish context. So my first one for yourself, Gohar. At the start of your talk there, you went through the basic conditions enabling student representation, the enablers of student representation, which align with the framework which Oisín outlined as well at the start of this session. From your experience, is there a priority enabler or one that we should invest our energies in the Irish context?
Yeah, I guess I would need to have a deeper understanding of the Irish context at the moment to go deep in. But so far, what I see from the outside, at least through my interaction with different decision makers and academia representatives in Ireland, I see that there is a strong kind of will from the side of the decision makers to come to a partnership with students. So I would say that this is the most important precondition, and I hope that well, I guess the Irish students might correct me if I'm wrong, but I see from the outside that the will is there. Another thing that I could say could be interesting to do maybe for the Irish context is to actually kind of research what's the impact of student engagement. How does student engagement impact the university, the development of the university, both the social and the academic development of the university. And here I think you can get really interesting data and outcomes from such a research that could help to go beyond what you have at the moment.
Brilliant, thank you. Brilliant, thank you, Gohar. And as a student, I definitely agree with you there as well, with the will in the Irish student representation here. We have a question from the chat then, which can be adapted to both speakers. Are there any areas of student engagement that could be improved in Ireland? I suppose if we start with you, Sjur, and maybe you're looking at the existing instruments which you spoke about. Is there a particular instrument or an area of student engagement that, from your knowledge of the Irish context, that we can improve in?
Thank you. I don't know if my knowledge of the Irish context is really sufficient to give clear advice to Ireland. I think in many ways Ireland is an example for many other countries also. But if I can sort of turn this around and pick up a bit on the previous question also, and while I certainly agree with Gohar, but it maybe underline another aspect, and that is in a sense our view of competence. Because I think one obstacle both to students and to staff is that both students and staff sometimes may have a quite traditional, quite narrow view of what competence really is. In other words, they would focus on the subject-specific competence. Student engagement, student representation also develops transversal competences, to use the terms of the tuning project. In other words, analytical skills, presentation skills, listening skills, and things like this. And we really need to see this also as an investment in our own competence, as well as being a benefit to the institution and to society. Here again, I think actually the work that Ireland has been doing on its qualifications frameworks and the qualification in general, again, is an example that many others in Europe can also learn from.
Thank you, Sjur. Can I just come in there and pick up on a point that both of you have indirectly linked to about the value added of getting involved as a student? And as we know, there's so much competing demands on students' time now in terms of their directed learning, their self-directed learning, that seeing that immediate value for them in engaging in structural arrangements in an institution to partner, that might not necessarily be obvious to the student or the institution. And how could we improve that, either formally or otherwise? So I might ask you first and then Gohar, if that's okay.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Well, I think one of the ways in which you could improve it is actually use the credit system, use the ECTS systems, and say student engagement can count toward your degree. Obviously, then you need to balance that with everything else that counts. I'm not saying that you should have a bachelor of 180 credits in student engagement, but certainly, there are courses, there are activities that fit in, and that definitely should help it. I think also increasingly, there again, I'm certainly not a voice for seeing education only as preparation for employment, but it has that dimension also. And I think many employers today increasingly look at not only what you did on campus, but what you did off campus, outside of the classroom. So it really does count. And we have to be, I think, better at getting that message across.
Thank you, Sjur. And Gohar, can I just ask for your final comments, please, on that topic?
Sure. Yeah, I fully agree with Sjur. I think especially application of ECTS for extracurricular activities that are done in student body, through engaging with student body is a great way. And I think because if we look what really motivates students to engage is an interesting social experience that brings a type of informal learning that they gain through engaging with student activities and with student union particularly. So I think, yeah, this type of fruitful social learning experiences, informal learning experiences are the aspects that could be embedded more in student participation and in student engagement to make sure that students are truly motivated and engaged. And this will obviously also create a kind of sense of belonging among students to the student body, but also to the institution itself.
Thank you. I'd like to thank our speakers. I'm very conscious of our time and in terms of sticking to the agenda for today. So on behalf of myself and Dylan, I would just like to thank the conference for inviting us as co-chairs, and on my own behalf for the valuable lessons learned today from the presentations. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Great, and now I'm going to introduce, we're going to move on to our next speaker, who is Karena Maguire, Head of Stakeholder and Communications Division at QQI. I think I pronounced the first name wrong. Oh, I think you're muted there.
Muting is the game of the day, and thank you so much. Thanks for that introduction, Dylan, and thank you so much to our speakers. Thank you for our audience for sticking with us, and thanks for your patience around all our little imperfections today. But I think all in all, it's been a great day. It's actually, for me, I feel it's kind of impossible to come in after so many inspiring talks today, and I suppose to have any kind of an impact at this hour of the day. But we certainly had some fantastic, inspiring talks and some wonderful video contributions. And I think what we really miss is the applause in all of this. If any webinar or conference is worth listening back to, and let's face it, we probably have so many at this stage that we've promised we will reflect on when we get a chance, please listen back to this one. Let this be the one. It's totally rich with energy and inspiration. It offers so many tips on immediate impact, on long-term planning. There's plenty of opportunities to be followed through on, plenty of concepts, whether you're from further education and training or higher education. Please prioritise this recording just before you reach your holiday limit, as I think many of us are very close to that limit, and certainly webinar fatigue is a huge part of that, particularly for our staff and students and those staff that are still with us. So I suppose partnership is a really important strategic imperative for QQI, and I have to say, maybe I'm biased, but I do think we're flourishing in this approach. We're delighted to bring 2 powerful initiatives together today to team up to demonstrate, and 3 when we add in USI as well. QQI has benefited and multiplied effort so many times over, and impact when partnering up with Student Survey, USI, student representatives, and of course the NStEP programme, which we're happy to steer with our partners in the Higher Education Authority. All of these initiatives and engagements keep us as an agency very close to the reality of how things are acting out on the ground, how they're faring out on the front line, as we refer to it now. But of course, it's not all about the students, because we also have to enable and ensure, as many of the speakers have said, that staff are recognised as an essential element of this genuine, legitimate partnership. And I suppose this is the happy union we're trying to achieve and trying to support today. Support for both is still required ongoing. Many of the speakers have referenced the leadership of Oisín, Siobhan, Lorna and Kevin today, but I can truly say I have witnessed this leadership firsthand on so many occasions, and I am completely in awe of them. What more can I say? They were impressive before COVID, but during this unprecedented trying time for everybody, they have been absolutely outstanding. I'm just amazed every time I engage with them, and as have many of our students and staff trying to cope during this time. Maybe to reflect on some of the earlier comments and I suppose concepts that just to reiterate some of what was said. Lorna, I think, started us off by talking about meaningful student engagement, genuine partnership. And I suppose the QQI executive, we definitely have an opportunity to see that front line genuine partnership. As Mairead said, there's plenty of opportunities to report into us. But when we go out to talk to institutions, I think, the partnership Richter scale is definitely evident. The empowerment in partnership, completely and utterly believe in this. Partnership is truly empowerment. And I suppose as a quality assurance and qualifications authority, it's worked so effectively to multiply our own efforts with such partnerships, NStEP and others amongst them. The NStEP, of course, is the epitome of that partnership between staff and students, and it is a great initiative. It's proving to be quite successful for those who have taken it up and run with it. And of course, the data from the student survey is the essential fuel for this really important partnership to be much more effective. And I mean, there is lots of talk about co-creation as well. I think in the current context, we can see that students are now in the space of co-creators. That is, of course, if we listen to them and take action and realise and recognise that this is actually where we are to make most of our progress. As Lorna said, we can't actually risk missing out on some of the great opportunities, and I completely agree with this. Sophia and Lucy, a fantastic piece on the provocative partnerships, and of course, yes, the dynamic created by students coming forward should be provocative. Of course it should. The co-creation concept, as our last 2 speakers have also referenced, is really a place where we want to see everybody moving forward. The poetic dialogue, what a creative and accessible approach, and the sheer power of partnership coming through there again, understanding the power play in that partnership. Together we can make it each another more powerful. Yes, it's impressive and impactful when we work together. Genuine, legitimate partnership. Couldn't agree with Sophia and Lucy more. I could have listened to them forever. I think I'll definitely be purchasing their book on the power of partnerships. And I suppose when Hilary said that she hopes students are as essential to us as they are to her, I think we all agree that students and listening to students and engaging them is a most productive and essential piece for all of us to understand. If we're no longer students, watch out for the humanity factors. Of course, this is a different context. Everybody has different humanity factors, and also growing up in such a different world these days, I think the humanity factors are something that we all need to keep in mind. Students are better role models than professors. Now, that's not something that I'm saying. I'm obviously quoting Sjur there, and thank you for that statement. I suppose that has actually made me think about, yeah, you know, I probably have said that to myself on a few occasions. We've seen quite impactful student contributions turn around the outcomes of so many, certainly quality assurance activities over the years. And I think many of my colleagues in QQI would agree with that. On the direction of policies, strategic input at governance level for institutions, changing an expert panel perspective during all sorts of accreditation activities, including research, winning a panel over during an institutional review and turning it around for an institution. And more recently, my own personal experience in chairing a European review of an international quality assurance agency. The student member led many of those sessions, and I would have gladly allowed him to chair it as well. So, you know, students are better role models than professors. There's definitely something there. Maybe just to say, in my own personal experience, I have to say I have found engaging with students as being one of the most productive parts of my role in my organisation, and also in the legacy agencies that I've worked for. It's energising, it's invigorating, it's real, it always leads to productive outcomes, and I think it typifies innovation that's waiting for all of us on our own doorstep if we use it properly. That includes agencies, government departments, it includes representative bodies, and of course providers. So let's consider how we can use that. There's too much else to go over again, except just to thank our speakers again. Thanks again to Oisín and Siobhan, again showing your leadership in bringing this conference together. Also to Lorna and Kevin for backing us on this. And also to all of you for keeping us closer to the stars, as Sjur has said earlier. Thanks also to Laura, who's really helped pull all of this together today, and other QQI colleagues. It's been quite the production, even though the participants may not see it. Thanks to Louise, Luke, Duncan and Alison, Mairead and Sue. They've all worked very long and hard to bring this event to you. And thanks again to our very impressive audience at this stage. We hope really to bring our speakers back so that you can hear more about their efforts, and to keep this as a very live topic on the agenda going forward as far as QQI is concerned. So let's all go much, much further together in this empowering partnership and make it work for everybody. And don't forget to watch out for the student engagement framework. Thank you very much.